Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to address the slightly erroneous comments that are flying around regarding Boris Johnson saying he's going to legislate to make it illegal to seek an extension to the Brexit transition period beyond the end of 2020. But first, if you want to see more of my videos, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, this is the idea. So where we are with Brexit at the moment is Boris Johnson is going to force through his Brexit withdrawal bill with no amendments, exactly as he wants it, through Parliament. It'll get finished off next month after the Christmas break, and then we leave the EU by the end of January. It doesn't actually have to be January the 31st. It could be a little bit earlier if you want to make a show of it, because we can leave as soon as everything is done on both sides, in the EU as well as the UK. And then we enter the transition period. The transition period lasts up until right at the end of 2020. So for 2020, nothing materially changes. We lose our membership. So you could argue that the only thing that would change is that we no longer get a say. But given that we haven't been having a say for the last few years and we've completely disengaged, yeah, nothing materially will change. We'll still be in the EU to all intents and purposes, and we will still be following all the rules and supposedly negotiating a withdrawal agreement. Now, anyone who knows anything about anything, or listens to people who know anything about anything in terms of international treaties, trade deals, particularly free trade agreements, know that you cannot arrange one within 11 months. Even with the best of intentions. And bear in mind, most trading blocs, when they wish to arrange a free trading agreement, are both up for it. Oh yeah, they're really up for it. We're the opposite. We are not at all up for it. Every aspect of a free trade agreement you put to Brexiteers, it's like, oh no, we don't like that. So we're going to be dragged kicking and screaming to one, if indeed we're going to be dragged kicking and screaming at all. So it would take much, much longer. So by Boris Johnson putting this law in, what he's basically saying is we are definitely not going to be extending beyond the end of 2020. However, legislating for it doesn't do this. It's a stupid law. It's there purely for public consumption. It does nothing. And the reason is this. If Boris Johnson wished to enact some law that would stop me doing things that I like doing, that would be effective. There's nothing I can do about that. However, who is it that would seek an extension? Who was it that was forcing the government to seek extensions 3 times in 2019? It was Parliament. Parliament are the ones who, in theory, could force Boris Johnson to seek an extension. In practice, that can't happen in 2020 because the government now has a whacking great majority. But they are the people that could do that. Now, you cannot enact any law that tells Parliament what it can and can't do. And the reason for this is, so let's say you put this law in, you make it completely illegal to seek an extension to the transition period. Parliament goes, right, we want a transition period extension now. What would it do? It would amend or repeal the law and then enact another law seeking an extension. Simple. Easy. You cannot constrain Parliament with laws because Parliament decides the laws. It can enact new laws, it can amend existing laws, it can repeal existing laws as and when it sees fit. So it is there as a publicity stunt. Now, what is Boris Johnson's stated reason for this? Well, he has said that it is to show the EU that we are serious and that we will be prepared to leave without a deal if they don't give us our unicorns. Oh my God, it's back to that again. This strategy that has been proven to fail time and time again. The EU have made the point and demonstrated the point that they will not weaken the integrity of the single market for the sake of a trade deal with the UK. They will not. The rest of the world, which relies upon that integrity of that single market, to say nothing of the rest of the EU, is much greater. It's a much bigger market than the UK. And the way people have been putting this, just to draw it into sharp relief, the UK is trying to argue that the EU cannot do without a free trade agreement with what amounts to 1/5 of the size of its market. But by the same token, what you're really saying is the UK definitely can't afford to not have a free trade agreement with a market that represents 5 times the size of its current market. Absolute nonsense. It is an absolute nonsense. And the thing is now, though, they kept trying to say this strategy would work for like the last few years. And it was, well, certainly the last year and a half, and it was never going to. But they kept, because the can kept being kicked down the road, they sort of got away with it. They're not going to get away with it anymore because it is now final. He's got his majority. We are definitely renouncing our membership next month. It's really weird, the wording of this. I would normally say we're leaving the EU. We are leaving the EU, but we'll still be in the EU after January. We just won't be as a member. So it's really, I'm going to have to think of different wording. But that's the scenario. It's definitely happening. Brexit is happening. I am no longer a Remainer. No one can be a Remainer anymore. You are either a rejoiner or someone who just wishes to make the best of it outside of membership of the EU. And that's all there is to it. So something has to happen by the end of 2020. By the end of 2020, Boris Johnson has to do one of a few things, and it has to happen. Either he has to give in to the EU and accept full regulatory alignment. In other words, following all EU rules in perpetuity, or until we decide to tear up the treaty. I mean, I don't think he's going to do that. And certainly, if he did do that, all the Brexiteer supporters would go, hang on a minute. Even they would go, hang on a minute. What? Or he extends the transition period, acknowledging that if he wants a trade deal with the EU, it's actually going to take some years to find one that's mutually beneficial. In which case, again, all the Brexiteer supporters go, no, hang on a minute. I've spotted a little flaw here. Or he leaves without a deal, in which case all the things that were promised in, well, I would say promised, predicted in Operation Yellowhammer happen. All that chaos happens because as much as they will say, oh, well, we've got another year to put all this planning in, as much as they've spent £9 billion already on this so-called no-deal planning, there's only so much you can do. If you're going to go from a situation where we can have completely free trade to checks, then you cannot sort that overnight. What they would have to do is massively expand our border force for a start. And again, there's no signs of that happening. No signs of that happening. So by the end of 2020, there is going to be a rude awakening. Now, unsurprisingly, as a result of this news, the pound dropped. Remember, the pound went up a bit after the election last week because it was like, oh, good, he's got a large majority. So we know we're going to be fine for the next year. And actually, maybe he's got enough power that he doesn't have to go for the cliff edge Brexit, that he can actually negotiate a sensible trade deal with the EU. But oh no, Boris Johnson opens his mouth yesterday and says, no, we're putting no deal back on the table. This is it. This is the default position again. Pound goes down again. All those gains gone again. So, and that's the thing to keep an eye on. When you're trying to work out what's actually good for the economy on this Brexit water slide, don't listen to what the politicians say. Try and listen to what independent economists say, but if you don't really know who are the independent ones, look at the value of the pound every time Boris Johnson opens his mouth. If it goes up, then what he's promising, not necessarily what he's doing, but what he's promising is probably a good thing. If it goes down, then what he's saying is a bad thing. It's really that simple. So, in terms of whether Boris Johnson is just saying this for public show and in the end will agree some sort of at least bare bones trade agreement with the EU, or will he just go over the cliff edge? We can't really tell from this statement. Either could be true. It could be that he would be working towards an agreement with the EU and just over time trying to sell it to the public as complete break from the EU. After all, let's be honest, the vast majority of the public would not be able to tell the difference if we stayed having to follow all the rules of the EU. Because at the end of the day, there are no EU rules that are a problem for us ordinary folk. Not one of them. Not one. So no one would ever notice. But people would point it out very loudly. But Jacob Rees-Mogg was the acid test for me. If he was kicked out of cabinet, it would mean that Boris Johnson no longer feared the influence of the ERG and that he was thinking more in terms of an actual deal with the EU. By keeping Jacob Rees-Mogg in place, it means one of two things. Either he is fully on board with the idea of a no-deal Brexit, which is very likely, and or he does still fear the influence of the ERG. And it doesn't really matter which it is because that means we are still headed for the no-deal Brexit. So why would he want the no deal Brexit if after it we're going to be plunged into chaos and people will smell a rat and see him for what he is and then vote him out? A few reasons. First of all, Brexit was always a Conservative ploy to deregulate the country. The EU insists on minimum standards for things like workers' rights, environmental standards, and the Conservatives want to do away with all that. The other thing is the US trade deal. Now, bear in mind, we cannot have both the US trade deal and the EU trade deal. They are mutually exclusive. The EU's position is you're not having a free trade agreement with us if you not if you sign up to a US trade deal. That's fine, but you cannot sign up to the US trade deal that is being proposed by Donald Trump. Similarly, Donald Trump has made it clear that if you sign any agreement at all with the EU, he's not going to specifics about what it is. Any agreement at all with the EU, and you're not having this trade deal with us. And the reason for that is, again, he knows that the EU will insist on things that will make his trade deal impossible. They are mutually exclusive. You can have one or the other, or neither. You can't have both. And Boris Johnson is going gung-ho for that one. That is why Donald Trump is so pleased. So it is very, very likely that we are headed for that no-deal Brexit at the end of 2020. Liam Fox, for example, was saying, I think yesterday or the last couple of days, it was totally unnecessary for the no-deal planning. There was no need for it ever. Oh, if it was so unnecessary, then why has £9 billion been spent on it? And it will be necessary, absolutely. So that's the situation as it is. We can now say with a bit more clarity that Boris Johnson is certainly still on the path to the no-deal Brexit at the end of 2020. Not the WTO terms, though, that people seem to think is a thing. It's not. The WTO deal doesn't exist because WTO don't make deals. But of course, America blocking certain appointments has meant that, well, the DWT has sort of ceased to exist in any sort of relevance at the moment. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you would like to click the like button, then that'd be brilliant. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.